Rich Coutinho does a tremendous job, as today we're powered by Corona Light. He covers the Mets up in New York for ESPN, and Rich Coutinho is kind enough to join us right now on the Zach Gelb Show. Rich, appreciate a few minutes, and how are you, my man?
Pretty good, Zach. How you doing, my friend?
Well, I'm doing great, can't complain. So this is actually an off day that I think is going to be very beneficial for the Mets because of the tragic passing of Jose Fernandez on Sunday, and then the last 3 games for the Mets were pretty draining. Do you agree with that this off day in the midst of a playoff race comes at a pretty good time for the Mets to catch their emotions from the tragedy that occurred in Miami?
I think it really does a number of factors, and that's the biggest factor, the tragedy and everything that kind of went on in the 3 days when the Mets were down there. But I think just in the rigors of a pennant race, even aside from that, it's always great to have a day off because now you can set up your bullpen the way you want it to be set up. You get a nice, fresh off day for both Addison Reed and Juris Familia, who've pitched so many innings this year. And you get set for the final weekend, and it's really in the Mets' hands. And when you kind of look at it, and depending on what happens tonight, both in St. Louis and San Francisco, but let's assume both teams win tonight, and the Mets go into Philadelphia, and they have at that point a 1-game lead on the Giants and a 2-game lead on the Cardinals, and basically it's in their hands. If the Mets win 2 out of 3, no matter what happens tonight, if the Mets win 2 out of 3 games, it's likely that they will have not only have the playoff spot but a home game. And I think what the Mets really want more than anything else is win Friday night, win Saturday, not pitch Syndergaard on Sunday, and be able to set him up for the game Wednesday, the tie-breaking game, which, if the season ended today, would be in Citi Field. And think about 35, 40 days ago, and I said it on Twitter that I thought the Mets would be a playoff team and have a home playoff game, and many people laughed at me, but it looks like I'm doing the laughing now.
Well, a big reason why you're allowed to be doing the laughing now, and I'll even be honest with you, I was laughing at that tweet at the time, and I'm a little bit more pessimistic than optimistic. It's because when the Mets went through that brutal stretch of not winning back-to-back games for over a month, there's really been no one in this NL wildcard race that said, okay, I'm going to be the lead dog. So you need a little luck, and the Mets got that luck with how bad they played, that some of those teams were not performing and putting the Mets back many, many games.
I think that's true, and I think normally in a wild card situation, and again, last year was different because you had the 3 teams in the Central who just were in the mid-90s in wins and above. But normally 92, 91, 93 wins get you at least heavily in the wild card conversation. We knew going into August that number was going to be below 90, and obviously the Mets have a shot at finishing with 88 wins if they win their 3 games, but I felt 86 to 88 wins would be the range where this would sit. And one thing I did feel about the Mets is that, yes, they had won 1 and lost 1, and they had that series in San Francisco where they lost the first 2 games. But, you know, I've been around this team for the last couple of seasons, and there's something about this team that really shuts it all out that's outside, whether it's an injury, whether it's, you know, bad news, whether it's Terry Collins' job on the line, which I thought was a nonsensical thing the media did at one point this season. But I think that all those things combined, the Mets have become so numb to the outside that it almost becomes a benefit for them, and they band together. And, like, quite frankly, no other baseball clubhouse I've ever been around.
I'll tell you, whether you like Terry Collins or not, and sometimes I've been critical of him, and there's been a lot of other times that I've been giving him words of extolment, the way the Mets conducted themselves in Miami this past week with dealing with that situation with Jose Fernandez, the way the Mets were so respectful and they embraced and they had that moment before the game on Monday night, that was something that was very special, and there's a lot of mutual respect between the Mets and the Marlins from the way that situation unfolded in such a tragic setting.
No question, and I think Terry Collins put it best after the game when he said Don Mattingly went through a terrible week, and he went and reached out to Mattingly after the series ended, the last pitch of last night's game. And, you know, sometimes we watch sports, and we've reported on it all our lives. Sometimes we forget that these are people. And I think Terry Collins does a good job of trying to remind us in the media these are not machines. You don't put a punch card in and expect it. And in people, there's never a yes or no. Most of our lives are in the gray. It's not a black and white life. And I think that one of the things that Terry Collins always portrays to his players is that, yes, we're baseball players and we need to be professional and focused, but we also need to realize this is a game, and in the greater scheme of life, it's a game. It's the toy department of the store. And I think that was never better illustrated than these last 3 days with Terry Collins. But I've seen him illustrate it in a smaller scale with smaller items like that in the past. And I think Terry wasn't always a manager like this in his previous places. And does he make some X's and O's mistakes? Yes. Quite frankly, we all make X's and O's mistakes. But I think today's current-day manager, it's much more important that he has a band of 25 players that will support him. And I'll give you another illustration of it that permeates down the field. The Mets, the last 2 seasons, have had a lot of situations where they've brought players in that were competing for playing time. And I think the poster child for that was last year, Conforto and Kadire. And not only did Michael Kadire help Conforto, but before games, he would go over the scouting report with him. I've seen the same thing in this clubhouse with Wilmer Flores and T.J. Rivera. I see it with young players like Matt Reynolds and Jose Reyes. I see it with Lucas Duda and James Loney. And these are people competing with playing time for each other and maybe competing to extend or lengthen or better their careers. And yet the front of the uniform means far more than the back of the uniform. And I think that that's a resounding thing that I find in the Met clubhouse. I found it the last 2 years, and it gets you through those tough moments, Zach.
Rich Coutinho joins us right now on the Zach Gelb Show. I also have to say we give a lot of praise to Terry Collins right now, as we all expect now the Mets to get into the postseason. But you also have to give credit to Dan Warthen, because before the year, everyone was thinking about Harvey, DeGrom, Matz, Syndergaard. That's all the big names that we were talking about. Now this rotation looks completely different. Dan Warthen and the job that he's done with Lugo and Gesellman deserves an ample amount of credit.
He really does, and so does Frank Viola. I think that organizationally, and when you go even one step further, Sandy Olson got guys off the, quote, scrap heap to help his team. Think about where the Mets would be without Jose Reyes.
Screwed.
Think about where the Mets would be without James Loney. Think about where the Mets most recently might be without Fernando Salas. And listen, you're not always going to hit a home run with those acquisitions. It's like anything else. But Sandy Olson this year has brought to the table. I'll throw another one out to you, Rene Rivera. Where would the Mets be without the players that I've just mentioned? And given that certain players they're relying on, like Michael Conforto, have not had good years, that doesn't mean Michael Conforto is not going to be a good or great player. It just means he took a little step back this year. But Sandy noticed that and was able to, take those things and the injuries together and make them work. But getting back to your Dan Warthen point, I've covered baseball for 30 years. Dan Warthen's the smartest pitching coach I've ever been around, ever.
Wow.
And I think the reason I say that is not so much that he knows the X's and O's like Rick Peterson and the metrics and the dynamics and the torque ratio and all that stuff. I think Dan Warthen knows people, and he knows that he's an older guy. But think about this. There's no generation gap when Dan Warthen has a conversation with Seth Lugo or Jerry Familia. And also, Dan Warthen is so not chained in his ego that if Jerry Familia has something that he's trying to be better at and Bartolo Colon is helping him with it, Dan will step back and let that conversation permeate and let that conversation percolate, I should say. And that there are a lot of pitching coaches who don't want that. There are pitching coaches who want the control. He has been times where he stepped back and let Ricky Bonas work with a pitcher because maybe that connection is better. And that is a big part of Dan Warthen. Also, he's great at teaching how to throw the slider and the changeup and really gets in front of his pitcher and say, I'm going to teach you this pitch, but if you're afraid to throw it, we shouldn't even bother learning the pitch. Don't worry if it's hit for a home run while you're learning it. It's going to happen. You're going to get up a homer off good pitches, too. And that whole mindset of Dan Warthen and his such lack of an ego has made this pitching staff be able to get to the point where it is missing, more pitchers in their staff than any team in the game.
The unexpected names and the unexpected success in sports is always the best success. And I'll tell you, someone that has completely exceeded my expectations this year, and we talk about all these players and we haven't mentioned him yet, is Asdrubal Cabrera. He's been sensational this year. And really that 1-2-3 punch of Reyes, Cabrera, and Cespedes, that's going to determine how far the Mets season and how long it really does last here, Rich.
I couldn't agree more. And, maybe Cabrera is a great illustration that sabermetrics is a tool and all these studies are a tool. And we all have a tool shed in our house. And you have a rake in your tool shed. And a rake's a good tool. Like sabermetrics is a good tool. You use it when you need it. But a rake you don't do to make every decision. You certainly don't use your rake to sweep up your carpet in the living room. Okay? But it's still a good tool to have in the shed. And I'm saying that because that's, to me, what sabermetrics is. But you can't forget your eyes, and you can't forget what you see. And with Asdrubal Cabrera, there's a secret sauce in him, in his soul, that you're not going to see on a stat sheet, that you're not going to see on a range of his defense. All I heard coming here is how he couldn't play shortstop because he didn't have range. And I'm not saying he's Dave Concepcion with range, but this guy has above average range. This guy has an accurate arm. Maybe it's not a Sean Dunston arm, but it's an accurate arm. I mean, the guy's made under 10 errors this year at shortstop, playing hurt a lot of the season. And the other thing is his will to win and his want to play when he's hurt. And those are things you can't see on a stat sheet. I'm not saying the stat sheet is unimportant to look at. I'm just saying for hundreds of years in baseball and decades, people relied on their eyes. And I think the stats can help you verify the eyes or validate them. But don't forget that your eyes are what scouts see to figure out what kind of player that they have. And if there's no better example of it than the guy that just went into the Hall of Fame for the Mets, or the guy that played first base for the Mets that's now in their broadcast booth. Both of those guys were not high-rated draft picks, but both of them are the type of player that I would want to manage every day and 7 days on Sunday.
Now, get into Jose Reyes. There was no question that he needed to show his remorse to get this second chance opportunity for the misogynistic act that did occur. But ever since coming back to New York, he has been someone that has been very respectful, and he's handled this the correct way, and there's no defending what Jose Reyes did. It was disgusting, but he got that second chance, and he's made the most with this opportunity. Has it just been he's so grateful to be back in New York when that's why he's so comfortable? It's why you're seeing the success that you are on the field? Because when they made the move, I was someone that said they should make the move. They had nothing to lose at that time. And he's exceeded my expectations by a whole lot. I didn't believe he would play this well. I thought he'd be good, but I didn't think he would be this good.
I've known Jose Reyes since his rookie year. I've probably covered as many games of Jose Reyes as any beat reporter has on the beat. And the thing that makes Jose Reyes tick is the game of baseball, and particularly the game of the baseball in a setting which he was comfortable in. Think about this for a minute, too. When was Jose Reyes' most successful year? When he won the batting title. Who was his manager?
Terry Collins.
I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that is he loves Terry, and Terry understands. Listen, I think the problem sometimes when some people that are not Hispanic look at Hispanic players and they say, well, why do they dance, and why do they do this, and why do they do that? I don't think any of us can, and this will be in the book that I'm coming out in February, a huge chapter of it. I don't think any of us, and I can't conceptualize either because we can't understand what living in St. Padre de Macorís was. We don't understand what Yoenis Cespedes had to go through to come to this country from Cuba. Yet we all try to take what we feel they should act and how they should act and permeate it. And the greatest thing about this country is everyone acts differently in different things. Some people act with more glee. Some people act with a little more remorse. Some people do this. Some people do that. Now, no question Jose Reyes made a mistake. But the one thing I know about Jose Reyes is when he's around a team and he's playing well, it not only gives him energy on the field, it gives him energy off the field. And you could see that in the clubhouse right away with Reyes, 4 or 5 days into his tenure there. And I think that it's given the Mets speed in the lineup, which they certainly were lacking. The one thing they were lacking big time is speed. And it also gives them some versatility. And it also, when you look at it, the Mets have gone through 2 second basemen now. They lost Neil Walker. They lost Wilmer Flores. And, now it's T.J. Rivera. I think going to next year, I wouldn't be shocked to see Jose Reyes have that position, and maybe the Mets move things around. If Walker comes back, maybe he's at third. We knew David Wright wasn't coming back this year, so we knew third base would be the vacant position just about all year. I think he's performed well. And I'm not surprised how he's played offensively, but I got to be honest with you, I'm a little surprised on how he's played defensively. I mean, he's made a couple of errors, and I think the Mets broadcast team hits on this well because Ron Darling and Keith Hernandez don't miss a beat. But I think the range he's given him in third has helped Cabrera because now Cabrera can play more in the middle, and that helps the second baseman because the second baseman can play more in the hole. And we know there's shifts and stuff like that. But in a core infield defensive alignment, Reyes' range has had a profound impact on the defense of the infield, not just in his position, but how it affects others' positions. And he's got a third baseman's arm, we know that, because he has a shortstop arm. So I think it's helped them in a number of ways. And I think Reyes is someone that is a big reason why the Mets are where they are right now.
I didn't know you were coming out with a book. Tell me a little bit about it.
It's going to be a book that's coming out in late February, early March of next year, and it's a 30-year retrospective on sports reporting in New York. So we'll take you through the 80s with the Mets. We'll take you through a lot of things that went on in New York. There's going to be top 10 lists in there of play-by-play men and columnists and beat reporters and all kinds of things. We're going to take you through the changes that occurred, how reporting was in the 80s and how it is today. What has social media done to it? How have now that teams own networks, how's that changed how reporting is done and structured? Talk radio, which wasn't around when I started in this business, and now is such a big part of it. And also there's going to be a primer in there for young reporters on what my game plan would be if this is what you want to do with your life, and understand that it has its advantages and its drawbacks. So it's a real exciting concept. I'm looking forward to it. And I think there's going to be some surprises in there, and there are going to be people that are not going to like some things in the book, but that's what writing a book is about.
I'll tell you, just in my brief time so far in this industry, you see a lot with what's online and how the whole writing has changed, and there's still some very good writers, and then you have some writers or some editors that are just trying to make things that are clickbait, and they may write something that they don't really believe. I just want to run this past you, and I'm not knocking Mark Carrig, who does a tremendous job, who covers the Mets, but whoever the editor was, whoever's in charge of that headline in the article yesterday in the Newsday, it's just absolutely deplorable how they had the headline of smooth sailing with sharp Noah. Did you happen to see that? Maybe it's because I'm not a writer, but I don't understand how a headline like that happens a few days after Jose Fernandez passes away when you see the headline of smooth sailing with sharp Noah and they talk about Jose Fernandez in that article. I thought that was disgusting.
Well, understand the business that the writer never picks the headline.
Yeah.
Never in a million years. So
that's why it's not Mark's fault.
I think that you have to remember that. And one of the things in the business that I've done is I've spent time in the newsroom and spent time in the remote locations. I know the problems you have in each of those areas, and I've always tried to kind of understand that. But in New York, headlines, they still think it, even though most people read things on a website now and don't pick up a physical newspaper, I think people think headlines sell. And I'll give you a story. When I was early in my career, the New York Post, it was a day when there was an FALN bombing in New York City. And I just was going to pick up the newspaper thinking that would be on the front page. And what was on the front page of the paper? Kate Jackson quits Charlie's Angels.
Unbelievable.
They felt that was a bigger story than an FALN bombing in New York. And that's got to tell you all you need to know about headline writers in the newspaper business.
Wow, that's really unbelievable. Rich Coutinho joins us from ESPN in New York. One more for you. Let's get back to the Mets real quickly. I felt that Jay Bruce, and it was not a smooth start when he came over for Dilson Herrera. We all know that. He was not playing at all quality baseball. But in that Phillies series, you started to see him make some better contact, and now he's been red hot in the last 5 games. Do you see this continuing from Jay Bruce? Has he finally been getting comfortable now in New York?
He does look like his swing is better to me. His swing looked like he was opening up the front side far too early, and the outside pitches, he was fouling them off at best. Now, most home run hitters are streaky hitters, Zach, but warp it up about a million times, and that's Jay Bruce. Jay Bruce had this problem last year, where he was off to a good start, and the second half he kind of slumped. So whenever he has a small hot stretch in his career, it seems that he's continued it over a period of time for a few weeks. Similarly, when he's in a cold stretch, it's very hard for him to get out of it. So hopefully for the Mets, he's had his cold stretch and he's beginning his hot stretch. And I'll tell you one thing. If the Mets get to this wild card game and win at home, the last thing the Chicago Cubs want to see is another Met hitter who might be in a hot stretch. Because Wrigley Field is made for Jay Bruce's swing. And think about this for a minute. You know, let's say the Mets make the playoffs, and there's still much work to do this weekend to do that. And let's say they win the wild card game, and that's going to be a really, really difficult game, especially if the Giants and Cardinals don't have to have a playoff for a tie before they play the Mets, and Baumgartner or Martinez is going to pitch that game. But let's say the Mets get past that game. How much pressure you think is going to be on the Chicago Cubs is my first question. And my second question is, what's the last big game the Chicago Cubs have played?
Well, here's two things. I'll answer that. First off, I agree with you. I thought of that driving into the show today, that if they could get past Bumgarner, if it is Mets-Giants, then they're playing with house money. And to answer that question, the last big game that the Cubs have won, I could not tell you because I haven't seen too many big Cubs wins in my lifetime. But there's no question, the Cubs are a better team. I don't know if the Mets starting pitching can compete with the Cubs, but the Mets are playing with house money. They have to get there, but the Mets do have the Cubs number. There's no question about that.
And, you know, as I was a kid, and you'll read this in the book a little bit too, I was a 9-year-old kid in 1969. So
wow.
I remember some of it. And there's a black cat that came on the field and, like, stared at Leo DeRocher. And after that point, the Cubs were headed. Last year, you know, the whole GOAT thing with the name of Murphy kind of sealed it. But I'm telling you, if the Mets get to the playoffs and upset the Cubs in the first round, they may not let a New Yorker ever again in O'Hare Airport because that could be a really gut-wrenching thing. And listen, there's a lot of feel-good about the Cubs right now, and rightfully so. They've earned it all. But when I look at what the Mets did in the postseason last year, I say to myself, and the Mets – you know, that's had a good lineup last year, kind of very similar to what they have this year. We didn't know Murphy was going to do what he was going to do, but there was a stretch in the playoffs where the Mets beat Kershaw, Zach Greinke, Arrieta, and John Lester, and it was like in a short period. It wasn't like in a week period. And I look back at historicals. I can't think of any quartet of pitchers that a team beat in the postseason that even comes close to what those guys do. So we know the Mets have it in their skill set to do it. I'll use a Fred Wilpon word. But I do think that if you win in Chicago and you take one of those first two games in a best-of-5, all of a sudden now the Cubs are in a war, and they haven't really had a must-win game this year because they've been so far ahead. And I'll go back to '86 and say this. The Mets beat the Astros in the NLCS. Mets are a better team than the Astros, but the Astros had good quality pitching. And the Mets were in a war in that series. And really, if they don't win Game 6, who knows what would have happened in Game 7 with Mike Scott throwing scuff balls for the third time in the series. So I think that you get into a short series, and I would much rather play the Cubs in a best-of-5 than a best-of-7 because the Cubs do have a lot of talent, and you got a better shot at upsetting them in a shorter series than a longer series. I'd rather play – all you can hope for if you're the Mets, Zach, if you get into that series is say, I'll sign up for it right now. Give me Game 5 in Wrigley. I want this Cubs season to come down to one game for that. And that's what you do, and that's how you approach it.
I'll see you this weekend, Rich. Appreciate the time. This is a whole lot of fun.
All right, Zach. You take care.